The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Roger Martin joining us. Roger, welcome.
It's great to be on, Michael.
Roger, you are the founder and president of Roger L. Martin Incorporated. You're an advisor to CEOs around the world. You give keynote talks, workshops, and you've worked with many very well-known organizations like P&G, Lego, Ford. And in 2017, you were named the world's #1 management thinker by Thinkers 50. You've written, I believe, 13, if not more books. Maybe it's number 13 that just came out. The most recent, A New Way to Think, your guide to superior management effectiveness. So I thought we'd start off our conversation today going back in time. You received your BA from Harvard College, your MBA from Harvard Business School, PhD from Royal Military College of Canada. And you hear a lot about companies these days that pay a lot less attention to someone's kind of educational background and where they went to school, and much more on their skills and kind of their experience. Can they code? Whatever it is that they can do. And I'm wondering, how do you feel about that? Where do you feel is the value in formal education? Has your thinking around the role of that formal education changed over the years? I'd love your take on that.
Sure. Although I do just want to make a slight correction. That's an honorary doctorate from Royal Military College. So I don't want to give the impression that I actually worked my way through a PhD. That was much easier to just go up and give a speech. So, okay. Which is great. It was lovely. But I think that formal education is important. But I guess I do think that there are lots and lots of great universities. And I tell people, because as people may or may not know it, if you apply to Harvard College, you get an alumni interview. And so any loyal graduate does the interviews in their area. And so I used to do alumni interviews. And what I would say to people is, don't fall in love with one university, because you're probably going to get disappointed, because there are just so many people now applying for all the more prestigious universities. It's a bit of a crapshoot as to whether you're going to get it in or not. Fall in love with a class of universities at a certain quality level or a certain kind, liberal arts colleges or big research universities. Fall in love with a category and then wait to see who you get into to fall in love. And that's because I think you can do great things from all sorts of universities. That having been said, I think if you skip that, there are some sort of high-techy kind of people say, teach yourself coding. Don't waste the time at a university for 4 years and the money. I don't subscribe to that view. I think you learn a whole lot and learn how to think and a lot of things. So that is worthwhile. Past an undergrad, I think more education should be much more love-oriented than functional. Like if you really like a subject a lot, really enjoy the learning process, go do it. If you're getting graduate education because you think you're supposed to, I don't think you'll do it all that well or get all that much out of it. And so that would be my advice. But my advice in general is just learn from everything you do. So you can sleepwalk your way through 4 years of college and not learn much, if anything, not interact with people in a way that makes you a more well-rounded person or a more thoughtful person. Or you can dive into it and engage in the experience. That would be more my thought than go to any specific school, any specific discipline. No, it's more about the experience of learning.
You started your career as a strategy consultant in 1981. Before that job, did you have any other jobs that you feel really impacted who you are today, or kind of a springboard for your future and the success that you've achieved?
Well, because I went directly from undergrad business school, because you could do that in those now ancient days, that was my first full-time job. I guess I had summer jobs. I always think that I learned the most and many valuable lessons around the kitchen table from my entrepreneurial father. So he started a business when I was 2, so I have no recollection of when he wasn't running Wallenstein Feed and Supply Limited. And so that's And I did work in the summers in the feed mill. It was an animal feed manufacturing company. I mean, I guess I learned very much about what hard labor type work kind of was, slogging feed bags and filling them up and driving trucks, and said, that's honorable work and the like, but I'd like to invest in ways of doing something that's more mentally challenging for me. So maybe that's a lesson I learned.
So you often hear that during our childhood years, so much of that influences the beliefs that we have, or even the limiting beliefs that we have later on in life. And if you could kind of take me back to those days when you're sitting around the table with your family, your father is this entrepreneur. I'd love to hear, is there one thing that stands out to you that you remember that was either very inspirational or just had a big impact on you in a positive way? On the flip side, is there any habit around those conversations, or anything that maybe your father did that you look back on now, or maybe even you did it earlier on and think, I wish he wouldn't have done that, or that caused some struggle for me? And I'm asking just to put this in context from the position of everyone who's listening and joining us right now who are entrepreneurs. They're running their own consulting business, whether they have a team or they're solo, but they may have their children around them or others around them. I'm wondering, are there any habits, characteristics, behaviors, attitudes that are very positive, but also that maybe were negative and that therefore people should avoid?
And I also want to bring my mother into it because she was equally sort of important in lessons that I applied to business. I guess I'm fortunate in that I can't think of any negatives. So I will dwell on the positives on this. I would ask Dad question after question about the business because I was curious. And one thing that I liked is he always gave me a thorough answer. He never volunteered anything about the business. If you didn't ask him a question, there was nothing he didn't come home to tell stories and regale us with stories about the business. That just wasn't his thing, but he would answer all questions. And from him, I learned probably more system dynamics than anything else. And of course, he was just high school educated. He did not have a second of university. And in fact, he had gone through high school in the sort of the non-university stream, right? The commercial stream. So he wasn't highly educated, but man, he had a sophisticated understanding of system dynamics. So I'd ask him things like, Dad, I know you have a policy, and your policy is at the start of a sales call, the salesperson hands the price list to the customer. And on it's got sort of every feed they make and what the price is depending on quantity. And there's a quantity discount. If you order 20 tons, it's less than if you order half a ton. And you never deviate off of that price list. And I sort of said, that seems a little bit arbitrary. And what if that's handed out? And so every farmer out there has got that week's price list. They can give it to the competition and say, well, this is what Wallenstein's offering. If you can beat it, I'll go with you. What happens if somebody just undercuts you? Like, shouldn't you have some more flexibility?
How old were you when you were asking these questions?
Oh boy, I probably wasn't all that old. I was probably 8 or 10 or something like this.
It just strikes. So my eldest daughter is 6 years old, and I'm just thinking about her asking a question like that. And it's just such a thoughtful question to be coming from somebody that age. So sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, please go on.
And so he says, would always start him with, well, Roger, here's the way I think about it. It's we want to win on the basis of the quality of our feed and our formulations that help the animals grow, and our service, because service is a big deal, but making sure the animals have the right protection, antibiotics, if there's problems, sending out our vet, et cetera, setting out our nutrition experts. So we want to win on that basis. And so if price is always up for negotiation, 95% of the sales call is going to be on price. And I don't want that. That'll take away time from the message we want to send. But if the farmer knows there is not another farmer anywhere on the planet who's going to get a better price than what's on the list, there will be no discussion about it. They'll look at it and just to check that we're we're in the right column. Yes, it's this feed and this is my volume. But then we can spend 100% of the sales call on the things we want to spend it on. And we work really hard on having a really great cost position. And so if somebody prices under us, they're cross-subsidizing. They have to be charging somebody too much. And we shouldn't be trying to win the farmer that they're cross-subsidizing. We should be figuring out what farmer they're overcharging and go and get that customer.
Right. What a conversation.
Now, as a strategy consultant kind of guy, it's sort of, you're thinking about sort of Nash equilibria, competitive dynamics, signaling, what gives the customer confidence, what you want to have the salesperson do. So it's sort of like, you've actually thought about this a lot, Dad, but it taught me you got to think about a lot of things to make a decision and take into account a whole lot of dynamics. And so I think in my consulting career, I always paid a lot of attention to how the policies that you put in place will cause sort of selection bias in the way you want. This would cause farmers to want to engage on other things other than price. It would cause the farmers to have confidence. It would cause the competitors to have to cross-subsidize to beat you. All of those things are the result of a policy that seems highly inflexible and maybe like a little bit doctrinaire and silly. No, it's not. It has a very specific purpose. So that I learned from him, but to not leave my mother out, that it says it's a great contrast. So Dad would always answer my question. I was like, what about blah, 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 blah. He would be, well, Roger. Mom, on the other hand, was exactly the opposite. I don't ever remember getting an answer to a question from Mom. Whenever I asked her a question, I would always get back to the same. I'd almost roll my eyeballs. And she would say, well, Roger, what do you think? So, hey, Mom, why was Auntie Delphine mad at Cousin Fred? Why do you think so, Roger? Right? And then I'd come up with something, and then she'd explore that and maybe the positive and negatives of that. Is there anything else we should be thinking about and whatever? And eventually we'd get to an answer, and it was a good answer. And I really understood the answer because I half came up with it myself, but got nursed along with her. So from her, I learned the thinking process and to recognize that you don't need other people to come up with answers for you. You can create answers. And the act of engaging with somebody else to help them create an answer is a sort of a noble thing to do. So it was a bit from both that shaped who I am.
Those are great examples that kind of remind me of your mom kind of working through a bit of a consultative selling process or helping you to ask great questions, which I think is very powerful. So that's amazing. So after working as a strategy consultant, you worked as a director for the Monitor Company, and you did that for a while. Then you went into teaching, and you were the dean of the Rotman School of Management, from what I understand. I'm wondering, why do you decide to leave kind of the quote unquote business world and get involved in education?
So I was a strategy consultant for 17 years, most of the time at Monitor Company, and one of the small group of people who grew and led Monitor Company for that period. And that was sort of a big international classic strategy consulting firm. We competed with McKinsey, Bain, BCG. And we were in many respects in one of the four companies in that era that very large, like Dow Jones 30 companies would trust with strategy advice. And I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I was one of the ownership group, sort of like my company and the like. But I was, as I say, I was minding my own business, consulting. As part of that, I had set up their Canadian office, Monitor Company Canada Limited. And during that time, met a lot of Canadian executives. One of them called me up to say, I'm on the board of a Canadian company, Moore Corp, then the world's biggest office forms company, officially headquartered in Canada as a Canadian company, but actually its operating headquarters was in Chicago. And so we needed some help. And sure enough, I went to work for them on the board, and on the strategy committee of the board that we interacted with most was Rob Pritchard, the president of University of Toronto, very charismatic. He was sort of the boy president. He became president very young at age. And he took a liking to me, and at the dinner that he held at the huge president's house, had a dinner for the management team and the board, and he invited me along. And at the end of the dinner, when I was getting my coat, he said, I'm going to try and talk you into becoming the next dean of our business school. Now, I'd always thought that if I had a successful business career, I would turn to public service of some sort, maybe when I was 50-ish, maybe. I was 41 at the time and was not thinking about this for another decade. But he was very persuasive and talked me into it. And so I did it very much for patriotic reasons. By that time, the Monitor Company was dedicated to helping global companies be more globally competitive. And what I realized is that Canada didn't have a consequential global business school, like a business school that was consequential on the global market. And if it really wanted to grow consequential global companies, that it needed a business school in Canada, not one that you had to go to a US school, let's say, or European school if you were Canadian. And so I decided that I would attempt to help Canada have at least one consequential business school. So I gave up. I took a massive cut in compensation, 94% cut in compensation to do public service. That was about.
You were married at that time?
Yeah, married with 3 kids.
I have to ask, and then I want to kind of take us back on track, but what was the reaction within the family of, one, just making such a big shift? So you're on this track, you're ownership and director and on boards and all, and two, hey, I'm going to be taking a 94% pay cut to try and grow this university. Was everybody cheering for daddy, or was there some concern when you were considering that?
My wife was born and raised in Toronto, so it was a bit of going home. And the kids remembered Toronto because they were born when I was up running Monitor Company Canada Limited. So it was disconcerting to a certain extent, but they had family and relatives. They weren't going to a strange town. They were going to a town that they understood. And I guess my wife had enough confidence that we'd somehow figure out how to make my ends meet. I had done that to date. So be it. So it wasn't that tricky.
And then, Martin, I have to ask you, because then I know about 14 years after being the dean of the Rotman School of Management, you went back to your business roots. So you left Rotman, you opened up your own consulting and advisory firm, which you still run today. And I'm wondering, why make that shift? So you went from business into kind of education and back into business. What was going on at that time that made you decide to make that shift?
So I was dean of the business school for 15 years. I kept my fingers a little bit in the strategic advisory world while being dean, because I felt it would keep me current with business trends and also help me not being dismissed by business people who I wanted to have involved in the school as kind of just an academic, which they would often do, who doesn't really know how business works. So I kept my toes in it a little bit. And then when I stepped down in 2015 from being dean, I had a couple of years worth of sabbatical stored up. And sabbatical isn't what people think it is. They think it's a year off. It is not. It is a year of teaching relief. You don't have to teach at all, and you're expected to actually do more research. And so during those 2 years, I got back to, instead of just resting and relaxing, instead of teaching, I went back to a little more consulting, and there were just a couple of companies that I was working with who needed a little more help than usual. And I just recognized that I loved it. I missed it, and I loved advising CEOs on strategy. And so after the 2 years of sabbatical were over, I had ramped up the technicalities of when you're on sabbatical, you can do whatever you damn well please. And if you're at University of Toronto, the rules are when you're on faculty, you can do 50 days of paid outside activity a year. And while I was dean, I never did more than 24 because I said, hey, I've taken a giant pay cut to do something for my country. I'm not going to screw up doing that well by doing too much of my old thing. But during those 2 years of sabbatical, I ramped up my consulting to way more than 50 days a year. And then I realized, I don't really want to go back. I don't want to stop doing this because I'm really enjoying it. And so I went by, I guess that must have been maybe 15, 16 academic year, because 13, 14 and 14, 15 would have been the sabbatical years, to a 50% appointment, which I kept until 2019. And that enabled me to do as much consulting as essentially I wanted. And so at that point, I was just doing, and then in 2019, I decided I don't want to do any more academic administration. I actually don't want to do administration of anything. I want to do my own thing, which is, and the two things I love most, which is writing and advising CEOs. And so I went down from my 50% appointment to 0, retired in 2019, and have been full-time retiree for the faculty of University of Toronto ever since.
Have you ever had a challenge with marketing and getting clients? It sounds like things were always pretty solid for you in that area, that there was always opportunities. Or were there some challenges that you faced at one point or another running your own consulting business in terms of getting clients and building a pipeline?
Not in this era. I mean, in the good old days when Monitor was a startup in the early 80s and people didn't know anything about us and we didn't have a track record and we were going against McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, that was hard as hell. But since essentially going back to doing it, kind of no. And it's in part because I don't want to, if I was trying right now to do. Like at Monitor Company in the 90s, like I was one of the handful. There were actually three of us who were the biggest sellers of consulting services in Monitor Company. And my job was probably keeping something like 150 full-time hungry mouths fed with business. And so if I was doing that, I'd have to think more about marketing, but I don't want to do that. I just want to do what I do. And so mainly people hear about my work from somebody else, or they read stuff that I've written and just call me up, and we decide whether or not it makes sense to work together and take it from there.
So take me back though to those days of Monitor, because a lot of consultants do find themselves in that situation. And sometimes it's not the reality where they believe that they're competing against the McKinseys and the Accentures and all the other well-known firms. And again, it's not even true. They just kind of think about that. But for you, it was true. You were competing with these very well-known, well-established global firms. What did you do then to actually start winning business? If you kind of look back at that time and maybe transport that information to today, are there any kind of best practices or ideas that you would suggest to a consulting firm owner or a consultant who wants to win business, but they feel like they are competing for business with more established alternative firms?
Yeah. Funny you mentioned Accenture. Monitor Company created Accenture. We did the study for Arthur Andersen and Company in, I don't remember what it was, 83 or 84, where they were trying to figure out, with audit and tax business slowly but surely declining in profitability, what else to do with their skills and capabilities. And we came up with the idea with a study we did for Vic Millar, who then became the giant of that, the systems integration practice of Arthur Andersen and Company, which became Andersen Consulting, which became Accenture. So we created that. So we created a competitor. They tried to buy us numerous times, actually. These are probably things your listeners all know, but one thing, if you don't know, is that by far and away, and it ain't even close, the best source of business is existing clients. At one point, I did a study of our clients, maybe 10 years in, and said, where did these all come from? And the vast, vast majority of them came from somebody who we had done great work for saying, gee, these guys are good. And so the absolute best way to market as a consultant, and there isn't anything even close, right? So this is so far above anything else that you could possibly think about doing from a marketing or sales standpoint, is do great work and maintain great relationships with your current clients, and that you're top of mind with those clients. Even if you've stopped working with them, you check in with them. And so when a friend of theirs calls and says, I got this problem, have you ever hired anybody to do anything that's like anything similar to that? They say, oh, Monitor Company, or oh, Roger Martin. And if you're so busy marketing and selling that you don't pay attention to your current clients, or you don't keep in contact with your current clients, so they don't have mental awareness, as we now have it termed, then you've just shot yourself in the foot, and all the other marketing that you do is worthless.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
Roger, how much of that is you, during that process, you actually reaching out and asking your existing clients, did you have some sort of process in place to try and get more referrals, or you just did great work, you didn't ask, there was no process in place, and referrals just came to you?
Correct.
Okay.
I have found outbound marketing of at least the kind of consulting services I do, strategy, is worthless. And the reason is it's so abstract. What exactly is strategy? Most people who are in a position of buying it can know that much about it. It's just like a doctor. It's like you don't know what appendicitis feels or looks like. They do. And so what they need is somebody that says, these guys will take care of you, or this guy or this gal, whatever. This person will take care of you. So don't worry about exactly what they're going to do. I might not even be able to explain it in terms that you, my friend, care about. Just trust me, they're good. And then you go in and do something useful for them, and it all works out fine. But I ceased at Monitor Company long ago. I ceased even thinking about outbound marketing, advertising, and all of that stuff. The only useful thing you can do from an outbound standpoint is essentially, if you will, thought leadership, writing stuff that people will read and say, this guy sounds like he understands my issue or my problem.
Yeah, it's a great way to demonstrate value, certainly without having a conversation with somebody, for them to be able to read or consume any kind of IP that you've created or ideas or insights you've put out there. Your company is your name, which I just butchered a few moments ago and flipped the two. So I apologize.
No, lots of people do that. I have two first names as my name.
So you do have a team that supports the work that you do, but is it correct that you're the one providing the keynote talks, the workshops, the advisory services? It's all you, or you kind of touched on this a moment ago. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper, which is, have you ever thought about building a business with a team? So in terms of your own consulting firm and what you provide, where you have team members that can also deliver the services, and so it's not only you. What are your thoughts on that?
One, I did that once. We had a 1,000-person firm when I left, about probably 700 consultants. And so I'd sort of been there and done that and didn't want to do it before. And I have a bittersweet memories of Monitor. I mean, it was my home and I helped build it. It was a great, great firm. But we got into business with the fundamental idea that, unlike the other consulting firms whose business is selling projects, selling consulting services, that our view was great strategy should come from within. And our job is to do strategy assignments with the company in a way that, while doing the assignment, teaches them how to do it themselves, so that they are actually less dependent rather than more dependent. You get more dependent when you say, wow, those McKinsey guys or those Bain guys are just so smart. And the next time we have a problem, we got to phone them up again. That was our rationale. That was our belief system. And we believed it. And we did that for a while. But then we would hire scores of people and head a pyramid and head offices and head hungry mouths to feed. And when clients said, can you do this? And can you do this? And can you do this? We would say, oh, yes. And I realized that we were falling away from where we started with our philosophy. And it started to become apparent when Sears Roebuck Company became a $10 million a year client in 1990, which would be the moral equivalent, given pricing, of probably a $40 million client, let's say today. And then AT&T became a $50 million client in 1995. So that would probably be a $150 million client today. And then Merck, by 1998, by the time I left, was an $80 million client. That's just professional fees, not out-of-pocket expenses, reimbursables. And I said, we have lost our way, and we have a cost push force that is pushing us to do. You're not teaching Merck how to do a strategy on their own when you're billing them $80 million a year. No way. And so when I thought about it, I thought, yeah, and lots of people came to me because they liked me as a leader, and I was very popular and beloved leader at Monitor Company, create another mini Monitor Company. And I thought long and hard about it and said, we had the best of intentions, but the minute that you have got a pyramid under you, you sell to feed the beast. And I don't want to do that. And so I said, there's only one way to stop that, and that's to have nobody. And so I have nobody. I mean, I have the people who on the administrative side of the business are enormously, helpful. My COO and general counsel. I kind of have two people who help with scheduling and billing and all that, who are fabulous, and an accountant, whatever I've got. I got a handful of people who help me, but they do not provide consulting services. I provide consulting services. And so I have to get clients to do the vast majority of stuff. I have no choice.
So I noticed that. I believe your wife is a lawyer. She also serves as the company's kind of COO. And then you have a legal analyst. You have also an executive assistant, maybe one or two other people.
Two sort of EAs, yeah.
To me, that is also very strategic. It sounds like creating a lot of leverage so that all the things maybe you don't like to do or you're not good at doing or just aren't your highest value kind of creation areas, you have others focused on. So for you, does that mean that all of your time is spent either just working directly with clients or writing? Or is there something else that you're spending your time on? No, just those two things.
It's those two things for the most part. I mean, there's some coordination, obviously, with my GC and some coordination with my two EAs. But for the most part, I just advise CEOs and write. And I like both of those activities.
Let's talk about your latest book, A New Way to Think. How do you come up with the title? Kind of where did that idea of A New Way to Think come from?
In this case, it went through sometimes like an exact title in mind, kind of long before the words are written. This was sort of evolved along the way. At one point, it was Memos to a CEO, because I'd written lots of what's in the book originally were a memo to a CEO. But I just came to the conclusion that in each of the chapters had the similar format, which I standardized to a greater extent when I came to this view, which is they explained why the current model that was dominantly used was not producing the results desired. Don't use this model because it produces results I don't like. It's you want to produce result X, you apply the model, you get Y, not X. So why is that happening? It's because you got the wrong model and here's a better model. And so here's a new way to think about 14 different areas.
Got it. You mentioned that you just love working with CEOs, helping them with strategy, leadership. What do you see as the most common mistakes that CEOs, and even kind of lumping into that if we can, or feel free to separate them, consultants or advisors? What are the biggest mistakes that people make kind of in the areas of strategy to begin with?
Well, I mean, the biggest one on strategy is to do planning instead of strategy. That's unfortunately, I think, probably no more than 15% of Fortune 500 CEOs have a useful definition of strategy. So how can you do strategy if you don't even know what the definition of it is? And it's not because they're dummies or anything. They're taught this. They're taught this in business school. The whole environment is a strategy is actually a plan. And the most common characteristic of any plan is the person responsible for it, the CEO or the head of corporate planning, goes around every part of the business and asks what initiatives they want to engage in and comes up with a list of initiatives that are all sensible. They're rarely really stupid. They're all kind of sensible in their own way. And they say, that's our strategic plan. And they often refer to them as strategies. We have 20 strategies. The Asia division is going to build a plan. The HR is going to hire some talent, whatever. And then bad things happen out in the marketplace. And they're like, gee, we had a thorough strategic plan. What went wrong? Well, the answer is you didn't have a strategy. You didn't have a set of choices that were integrated and have as their output picking a field of play on which you're going to play where you will be better than all your competitors.
Is that your definition of strategy, or is there any other way that you would define it for people?
That's the tightest definition of strategy I have. I have to say strategies is the answer to 5 questions. Kind of, what's our winning aspiration? Where are we going to play? How are we going to win? What are the must-have capabilities we need to have? And what are the enabling management systems that will build and maintain the must-have capabilities to win, where we've chosen to play to meet our winning aspiration? That's strategy.
If people just spent the time to answer those 5 questions, how much further ahead do you think they would be than most of their competitors in the marketplace?
Because the practice of strategy is so pathetic, just answering those 5 questions would put them out ahead. Now, I mean, as with any framework whatsoever, you can answer them right in the most sort of rote, dull, drone-like way, or with some real thought. And I'd say some real thought wouldn't hurt. But yeah, the practice of strategy on average, I would, out in the world, the practice of strategy, I would give somewhere between a C and a D.
And Roger, when you think about, as people kind of work through those 5 questions and give consideration, what are the most common mistakes that they make, or what are the things that maybe they overlook that they should really pay more attention to? One
big mistake is they do them individually. They say they go to an offsite and come up with vision, mission, whatever, to fill in that winning aspiration box and say, I'm done. And they go and make a list of all the places that they could play, and then they pick some places and say they're done. Then they get to how to win. And often that's where they get bogged down then, because they realize they can't win in a way that's consistent with the winning aspiration where they've chosen to play. But they're kind of stuck because they've locked and loaded on those. So what you have to do is constantly vary them and think about a set of 5 that fit together and reinforce each other. That's the single biggest mistake. I mean, I would say the other mistake is just to feel like you're in a chess match against nobody. So you can come up with all these, I'm going to move here and move here and move here. And they're not going to be thinking about anything. My competitors are just going to stand there and wait around until I annihilate them while you're doing everything you're doing. They're doing a bunch of stuff to try and do the same thing to you. And so they don't take into account that competitive dynamic. I would say those are probably the two biggest ones.
And is there ever a time where you feel an organization should not pay attention to the competition? They know the competition is out there. They have a sense and an idea of like what they do, but their strategy should not really be thinking too much of the competition. They should just be focused on them and making themselves better. Or is it always important to consider how you have an advantage over the competition?
I can't think of a situation where ignoring your competition is a good idea. Being cowed by your competition, obsessed about your competition, okay, I would say those things aren't helpful, but ignoring them entirely. You see, I think paying attention to your competition helps you hone and refine and make more specific still your strategy and what it means. You sort of need reference points to be specific. Okay, what would cause us to spend $2 million on this rather than $1 million on this aspect of our strategy? Oh, it's because we're going to win against them on scale. We've got the capacity to spend $2 million when they are going to find $1 million as much as possible. That's why spending $2 is important. And of course, that's sort of a very blah kind of example, but in an attempt to be generic, but it just helps you be precise and specific on your strategy.
And as you mentioned, I feel the same way, that strategy is a word that people just throw around without really understanding it. Oftentimes, right, so you mentioned people kind of interchange strategy and plan. I also see tactics and strategy being interchanged all the time. People are talking about a tactic, but they're actually describing it as a strategy. Is there a point at which strategy is maybe premature? Like, so take the solo consultant. Should they be thinking about strategy? Like, do you think about strategy in your own business, Roger? Or is strategy like really having a process and making the time to think strategically or to develop a strategy? Is that in your mind only when you reach a certain level of complexity or size or infrastructure? How do you kind of feel about that?
No. Well, I guess, and I've written about this, I say everybody, every single organization, every person has a strategy. We don't make random choices. When you decide, I'm going to, get a sandwich now, that's a choice, right? There's not a random number generator in your head that says sandwich time. There is sort of one in your stomach that says grumble, grumble, right? But you make choices. So you can't not have a strategy. So it doesn't matter how little you are or big you are, you have a strategy. It's what you do. The only question is, what was the thinking process behind that caused those choices to add up to something that you'd want? So yeah, RLMI has a strategy. It's an extremely clear strategy. I do some things and I don't do other things. And when somebody calls, I operate in one way, not another way. My dad, when he started Wallenstein Feed and Supply, when it was tiny, had a strategy. Could have he articulated it? Probably not, right? Many entrepreneurs can't always articulate why they're doing what they're doing. I think by the time I was asking him questions, he always had a good answer to every question, but I'm not sure that he did day one, although there are probably some things he did day one that were kind of extremely strategic. Some of the attributes behind the question are influenced by the dominant view of strategy, which is its planning. So if you're little, do you have time to plan? Well, that's because the strategic planning is big, long, onerous, generally useless. And so no, as a little company, you don't have time to do something big, long, onerous and useless, but you will make decisions. And so that's your strategy. And then there's also a connotation about strategy that says, unless you've done a whole bunch of analysis, you don't have a strategy. And again, I think that's a red herring. That's not what defines a strategy. Bigger companies where they're spending more billions of dollars on initiatives and have a board of directors that they have to assure that they're being thorough, will do more analysis for their strategy choices than two kids in a garage. But the two kids in the garage may beat the snot out of the gigantic company because their logic behind the choices they've made is more robust than the logic behind the big bureaucratic company.
And we've seen that play out many times over history, right? So Roger, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that people can learn more about you. I want to encourage everybody to check out your books. You have a lot of work, a lot of Harvard Business Review publications and other ones you put out there. Before you do that, just a couple of quick questions. For you, in the role that you play, for you to feel like you're making the impact you want to have, creating the success that you want to create, what are one or two kind of habits or things you do on a regular basis that you feel contribute most to your focus, to your progress that you're able to make, and to the impact that you're able to have?
Well, one is really understanding what customers feel that they need. Because if I don't know what they really need and what they really care about, it's hard for me to focus on that, focus randomly.
How do you identify that? Is it just having conversations with them or?
Yeah, asking them a lot. It's not about solving the problem that I think they need to solve. It's more about solving the problem they think needs to be solved. Even if they're not completely right, you've got to earn in with a client by helping them where they're at. And once you've earned in, they will increasingly say to you, Roger, this is what I think we should be working on, but what do you think? And when they ask you that, then you offer it. But before they ask it, don't offer. So that's a habit I try to go back to say, okay, what client identified problem am I helping them solve? And if I don't have a really good answer to that, I say, then how exactly, Roger, are you going to do stuff that will be helpful? You don't know what help means, and you're going to try and do something. What you're going to do is help that. If that were Roger there, this would be helpful to that Roger. Well, no, it's not. It's Bill or Jim or Sally or whoever that you're trying to help. That, I guess, would be one. And then the second one is, am I working on the very hardest aspect of the problem in question? Biggest difference between super successful people and not so successful people is not so much that they know what the 10 biggest problems facing them are in whatever situation they're currently in. They can both list them and be fairly accurate on the 10. Less successful people start at number 10 and work their way up. More successful people start at number 1 and work their way down. And the good thing about starting with number 1 and working your way down is that often when you've solved number 1, you didn't realize it, but it actually partially or entirely solved number 4 and number 7. And when you did number 2, it also made number 9 and 10 go away. And so you get more over the hump of problems than not. And it turns out if you start from number 10, it doesn't make anything above it go away. And 9 doesn't make anything above it go away. And so you keep on having more big problems and you get overwhelmed. So I want to work on the big client's behalf. What is the biggest problem they would like to see solved? That's how I try to keep myself kind of on track.
Roger, how do you identify what is the biggest problem? Is it just simply asking the client, or do you have certain factors or considerations when identifying what is the biggest problem?
I start from where they start, but often they don't know exactly, and they'll give their hypothesis and then they'll say, what do you think, Roger? And then I can say, well, it could be this. What do you think about that? And then they'll say, well, I don't know about that, but what about this? And you get into a dialogue. But it's like doing linear programming. If you don't have an objective function, you can't have a solution. You need an objective function. What problem are we trying to solve? It's a good discipline. I always ask it before I go into any meeting. Say, okay, what problem are we trying to solve in this meeting? And if the answer is, the hell if we know, then you're wasting people's time. You should just disband the meeting or have a conversation about what problem we're trying to solve.
Roger, you've written 13 books. My final question before directing people to learn more about you is, in the last 6 months or so, what is one book that you've either read or listened to, could be fiction or nonfiction, that you would recommend?
The last book that I really liked was The Social Limits to Growth by a guy named Hurst. It's just a fantastic book that had me thinking a lot more about economic growth in a different way. It's the book that introduced the notion of positional goods. So a positional good is a good that if I have it, you can't. So a positional good is, back to college, is a position in the freshman class at Harvard. Somebody else can't have it if I have it. Facebook page is not a positional good. I can have one. You can have one. Anybody can have one. I don't know what the most prestigious shorefront property in Vancouver area is. Where people want to have a oceanfront property in Vancouver?
Oh, I mean, there's Point Grey.
Okay, Point Grey. So Point Grey then would be a positional good. Do you have a cottage on Point Grey or a house on Point Grey? Yes or no? And it's just a fascinating book about the economics of positional goods that I'd never thought about, and the dangers, the great dangers of positional goods and how they limit the growth of an economy. So that one would be my book of recommendation. If you haven't read Art as Experience by John Dewey, you'll be a less good consultant.
Art of Experience by John Dewey. We'll link.
Art as Experience by John Dewey. Painfully difficult book to read, but he's one of the greatest He's, Dewey Decimal System, among other of his creations. Yeah, those would be the ones.
We'll have that linked up in the show notes, Roger. Finally, I want to make sure that people can learn more about you, your work, all of your writings, because you have a lot of content. Where's the best place for them to go? For
my content, I've got it all nicely organized on my website, and that's just www.rogerlmartin.com. You've got to include the L for Lloyd, named after my father, because if you do rogermartin.com or send an email there, it'll be to a Houston real estate agent who is an extremely nice man. He and I have gotten to know each other because he gets so much email and he always dutifully forward to me. So I send him free copies of my books and everything, and we've got a good, but I do not want people bothering Roger Martin of Houston. So rogerlmartin.com, Twitter @RogerLMartin. And for any strategist out there, I have now just finished my 89th article in the Playing to Win Practitioner Insights series on Medium. So if you go to Medium and type in Playing to Win, you'll get over now 2 books worth of essentially practical follow-up to my Playing to Win book that I wrote with A.G. Lafferty.
Well, fantastic. Roger, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your journey and lessons with us all here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.